guest in Dr. Alan Conley, who will be with us, and his conversation will be facilitated by our own Brian Smith. So I will turn it now to you, Reverend Smith, to introduce our speaker and get the afternoon underway.
Good afternoon, everyone. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brethren and sisters can gather together in unity. I am excited to introduce our speaker for the hour, Reverend Conley, who is a Chicago native. He's from the south side of Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, and we're excited that he knows about the space where we serve and where we live. He received his BA in Christian Studies from Trinity International and his MDiv from McCormick Theological Seminary. He proudly declares that he is called beyond, which is so exciting to me because he wants to actually do work in the communities, not necessarily in the four walls. And he has indicated that even though he has come from a long lineage of preachers and teachers, he wanted to do something very different. He actually wanted to have a career in music. And he discovered later through his life that he could share the gospel in an unconventional way. So I think based upon his testimony, and he shared that he would prefer to call himself a communicator of the gospel rather than a preacher. He has an inspirational show entitled Unconventional. I've witnessed that show, and it is unconventional, but it is very fruitful. And during the pandemic, he also organized a ministry called Beyond the Brick Ministries. Probably his most popular title at this point is serving as director of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives for the Chicago Public School System. And he hosts regular meetings, and he'll probably talk about that later, but he regularly engages the community. And he's going to talk to us for about 20 to 25 minutes or so about his service and ministry. And then we'll begin a conversation, and then we'll open up the floor for other questions and comments. So I bring to you Reverend Alan Conley.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Smith, for the wonderful introduction to President Gray in his absence, to Lisa, who also gave me a warm welcome earlier, and to all of the faculty, staff, and students. I greet you with the love of our Creator. And also, I have to say this, I also give great thanks to Ms. Kim Schultz, who probably had the most vigorous task of all because she had to deal with someone who operated with intentional procrastination in getting their bio and information over to her, and that would be me. And so I don't know if she's here. Well, there I see Kim. So thank you so much for your help, and I hope I didn't cause too much stress or unwanted stress and unnecessary stress. But hey, that's what preachers tend to do. And sometimes preachers can create unwanted and unnecessary stress. This is what happened during COVID-19. COVID-19, I remember coming out of 2019, had already traveled to Shanghai, had traveled to Indonesia towards the latter part of 2019. Coming into 2020, I heard a plethora of preachers in the Christian faith saying that 2020 would be the year of vision. It would be the year of clarity. It would be the year of focus. There was not a day that went by that I did not hear about something dealing with vision. Well, no one saw March 15 coming. By March 15th, the same people who were saying that this was going to be the year of vision, this was going to be the year of clarity, the year of focus, no one could see anything after that. After that, we're shut down here in Chicago, in the Chicago Public School System, where I serve as the director of the Office of Faith-Based. We had to suspend all of our after-school programming. But one of the things that I was paying attention to during that season is that there were many people in the Christian faith. I can't speak for all of the other faiths, But in the Christian faith, right here in the United States, there were so many pastors and leaders that were pushing a message of saying that you can't walk in fear. We're supposed to walk by faith. Don't be afraid of the virus. Don't be afraid of the news that you're hearing. And it didn't sit well with me, only because I am clergy as well. And here it is, I found myself at times just wondering, questioning God. What is going on? Why is this happening today? And reality is, if we look at our leadership here in the United States at that time, we know that we were in for trouble because we were no longer the United States of America. We started becoming the divided states of America. Well, it wasn't until later on in the summer where I would contract the virus. I contracted the virus, and I realized that it wasn't fear that caused me to end up contracting the virus. It was just nature. It was just the elements. I was working out every day, and the facility where I was working out, even though we wore masks, we followed the CDC guidelines, I still ended up contracting the virus. Well, while sitting at home quarantined, I found myself looking at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, realizing that there were people who were in the same predicament that I was in. Many of them asking for prayers, many of them of a myriad of faiths, asking people to pray for their loved ones, only to find out 3 days later that their loved one had passed away. Well, I tell you, that's enough for anyone, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, to find themselves in a place of helplessness, find themselves in a place where they're looking for some hope. That's when I began to turn to my faith, and I realized that faith is not the opposite of fear. There's a passage in the ancient text that we know as the Bible, where Jesus has a conversation with a lawyer about who is this lawyer's neighbor. You know that story as the Good Samaritan story, right? As if other Samaritans were bad. But this Good Samaritan in this story, Jesus has this conversation with this lawyer about receiving eternal life. But it's interesting that this man asks Jesus how to receive eternal life. And Jesus ends up telling a story about a man who nearly lost his life. I tell you, that's how God works with us, where we're in a situation where many people are preaching eternal life in this season. Many people are preaching soteriology and teaching and can teach it well. But what I found out during COVID-19, that if we are in the soteriological business, if we believe in saving souls, that perhaps then we need to make sure that we're following the CDC guidelines and putting measures in place to keep people safe and not putting people in harm's way. So I began to counter the messages that I heard from preachers telling other folk that you can't walk in fear, you have to walk by faith. When I read that passage in Luke chapter 10, where Jesus tells the story, this gentleman is coming from worship. And here it is, he falls amongst thieves. But it's the church that walks by. After the priest goes by, a Levite, he also goes by. But there's someone who does not look like him, someone who he's not even supposed to be in fellowship with, someone who is considered to actually be a direct enemy of his people. That is the individual who helps this man. He attends to his wounds. He puts him on his horse and takes him to an inn, puts him up in the Holiday Inn, and he's now taking care of him, even pays for his stay. My brothers and sisters, my friends, colleagues, what I discovered in this season is that gentleman who helped out the man who was coming from church, who was coming from worship, he was not someone who perhaps was walking by faith, as we would say, but he was someone who did operate in love. And I tell you, I found out that where there is an abundance of fear, there's probably a lack of love. In this season of COVID-19, many of you have come to this realization that our God is not religious. Yes, we may have a myriad of religions represented on the Zoom call today, but COVID-19 revealed unto me that our God is not religious. God is relational. And I tell you, it doesn't matter what faith you subscribe to. It doesn't matter what you believe or what you don't believe. But when I found myself at a place where I was quarantined, didn't know how I was going to make it out, I did believe that I was going to come out okay. But I tell you, the psychological toll that it played on me, looking at Facebook posts and seeing people passing away 3 days later, I couldn't help but ask, will I make it out? I now understand that it wasn't my faith that brought me out. It was the love of the Creator that brought me out. The love of my family members and friends that brought me out. Some of you can attest to it on this call today, that it was love that lifted you when it seemed like nothing else could help. Love lifted you. Some of you can attest to the fact that you weren't really looking when you were in your lowest moment. You weren't looking for a great theological terminology to help you through that dilemma. You weren't looking for someone to give you the historicity of something that you had been studying down through the years. You were simply looking for love. And I tell you, working in the Chicago public school system, I found out that many of the young people, they're not just looking for someone to help them pass and go to the next grade. Many of them are just looking for the love that they're not getting in their homes. That's why I love this story with that Good Samaritan. Because at the end of the story, Jesus asks that same lawyer, which one of the characters in that story is the neighbor? And the lawyer says, the one who showed mercy unto the gentleman who fell amongst the thieves. And Jesus gives him this command. He says, well, you answered correctly. Go and do likewise. This particular story lets us know that that same commandment to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, it is something that is common. It is similar across all mainstream religions. In Judaism, the Torah commands to love your neighbor as yourself. In the Quran, we read to serve Allah and to join not any partners with him, and to do good to parents, kinsfolk, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companion by your side, the wayfarer. The Christian scripture speaks about loving your neighbor. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Then that second commandment, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. I tell you, brothers and sisters, loving your neighbor is the most universal commandment. And I love that commandment because now when I look back over my life, not just looking back over COVID-19, but when I go back to when I was just a young lad, I realized that it was love that was carrying me through. And it's going to be love that's going to be with me even until the end of the world. If you're grateful for that love, the love of God, the love of your Creator, I would ask you, if you don't mind, if you just want to clap your hands, whatever you want to do, but let's give that God some praise on today, because our God is a loving God, a caring God. The old mothers in the church where I grew up at, in the Baptist church, she would sing the song. She would say, I love him because he first loved me. And I tell you, when I wasn't thinking about loving God or loving my neighbor for that matter, God was still loving me. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you so much for allowing me to share a little bit about my testimony as it relates to COVID-19.
Thank you, Reverend, for reminding us to love. I think quite often we get caught up in the hustle and bustle of our busy lives. And you speak a truth. I mean, if we're not loving, what are we doing if we're not caring for others? And so I want to say that I love your term, being called beyond.
Yes, sir.
It kind of captures my imagination. And like many faith leaders, you were probably driven by a call, but I want to start our conversation by asking you, how did you manage to reach this particular assignment, being with the Chicago Public Schools? Because a calling does not necessarily reveal one's specific assignment or ministry service, but somehow you found yourself with the CPS Office of Faith-Based Initiative.
Well, I couldn't say it better than that. I found myself in this position. I tell you, I was working full-time in ministry, serving at the Metropolitan Apostolic Community Church under the late Reverend Dr. Leon B. Finney Jr. I have to tell this story first, because when I went to serve with Dr. Finney, his church was, as he would say, it was a floundering church. It was an older church, and he was trying to see how he could help sustain the longevity of this ministry. So I came on board, and I did not want to preach. I really wanted to observe and to see how I can be an asset to this ministry and help move the ministry forward. Well, I began to look at all of the initiatives and all of the wonderful ministries that this church had. Everything was inward focused. And so I began to have conversations with Dr. Finney, and I would ask him, do you think that even though we have an older congregation, do you think that the members would be willing to go out into the community? And he said, well, what are you thinking? I said, well, this church has been here for years. It's over 130 years old. And a lot of people see this building when they drive by, they just see an old building. They just see a historic building. And he said, well, I said, well, I think that if we can go out in the community and be present, people will know that there's life in this building. I said, I don't think that people understand that there are some living souls in this building. And every third Saturday, I was so strategic in the plan that I had written out that we would get groceries, go out in the community on the third Saturday, and we named it I Care, We Share. I'm a big fan of naming whatever it is that you're going to do. You name it. I believe in branding it. And then I believe in institutionalizing it. Because, if you don't do things consistently in the church, I tell you, those volunteers that you had last week, if you don't do it again for another 3 months or 4 months or so, you've lost them. And so I'm a fan of making sure that we're consistent. And so every third Saturday, we would go out, we would pick a community where we would give out these groceries. So I did this for about a year, and so many people who had never gone out, they felt so fulfilled in doing this work. Well, there's a gentleman named Chip Johnson, who is the chief of family and community engagement with Chicago Public Schools. He calls me one day and he says, Alan, I think there's a position at Chicago Public Schools that suits you. I really believe that you would be great in this position. I said, well, what is this position? And he said, it's the director of the Office of Faith-Based. And I said, well, what does it entail? He says, Alan, it's what you're doing right now. Now, here it is. I'm serving full-time in ministry. So, and those of you who serve in the church, I wasn't making that much money. And actually, I was creating an expense, not just for the church, but for myself in this endeavor. And he told me the salary, and I said, well, let me pray about it. And so I prayed about it, spoke with my pastor about it, and we both agreed that this would be a blessing, not just to me, but to our community, because they didn't have anyone, even those who preceded me in that office, they never really had anyone who was outward focused. And so I tell you, so Reverend Smith, I think that the assignment for me in this season, which was to go out beyond the four walls of the church, the same thing was needed for Chicago Public Schools. Everything that the district was doing was in the schools, right, within the district. But to come in, and I began to think beyond the school. And how do we begin to bring the faith community and get the faith community involved with the work that we do. And so the first initiative that I came up with when I joined the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives with Chicago Public Schools was to bring in or to create a food pantry at a school on the west side of Chicago called Spencer Elementary School. And we started giving out food once a month to the families of the students there and to people in the community at large. They could come and get fresh produce. And we still do that even today.
Can you talk about some of the main initiatives that you engage in your role with CPS? How do you work with CPS to make an impact? And then later on, we'll talk about how faith communities can engage and work with you. But just talk a little bit about what you're doing, some of your primary activities in terms of leading the office.
Yes, sir. So there are three main initiatives that are ran out of my office. One is crisis support. So whenever a young person passes away, whether it's tragic or natural causes, we get an alert letting us know that this young person passed away. Though we are, I'm clergy, I have another community coordinator who's clergy. We can't promote faith per se, but we can promote faith-based partnerships. But what we do, now don't tell anyone this, but what we do when we call the families, we ask them, if they have insurance. If they don't have insurance, we offer up to $1,000 to help with the funeral expenses. So we talk through some of those things. But after we get done handling the business, the protocol that's set in place for us as working with Chicago Public Schools, we do ask them if they are people of faith, if they don't mind us praying with them or for them. And we have never had anyone turn down prayer. And so that is a moment that, though it is not something that we look forward to, we are grateful that we have this opportunity to try to bring some consolation to some families who are going through, who have questions. And so that's something that we do as it relates to crisis support. We also connect to other resources. So if the young person was a victim of a crime or a homicide, we work with the state's attorney's office and the attorney general's office to bring additional resources to help those families out. The other initiative that we have is an initiative called Adopt a School. Adopt a School is where the faith community can get paired up with a particular school and provide social service supports throughout the academic school year. Some of those supports look like the food pantries. Some of them do gift cards during the holiday season. Some of those faith communities will actually do mentoring and do tutoring. And the sky is the limit, right? But the whole idea is that that faith community is paired up with the school and they talk through those particular projects. The last initiative is the oldest initiative, and it's called Safe Haven. Safe Haven is where the faith community can go through a procurement process and they can become what's called a Safe Haven vendor. Now, in the past, many of these vendors, or they weren't vendors in the past, but they were selected by another vendor to be subcontracted in. And many of them, unfortunately, chose to be a Safe Haven vendor because they're compensated for the work that they do. So all of this predates me. So when I came on board, I didn't want us to get in trouble for oversight or overspending. I wanted to make sure that the faith community understood that this is not an opportunity to get the funds that you need to pay those utilities, although you can use those funds for the utilities. And so I start off asking a question, Reverend Smith, and everyone on the call. I asked this question. I say, how many of you all have ever prayed, Lord, send me a harvest? Lord, I'm waiting on my harvest. And everyone would just raise their hand. And so then I would tell them, I say, hey, I don't want to debunk your theology, but in most of our faiths, and especially those faiths that are highly agricultural in its tenets, there's nowhere in the ancient text where it says that God will send a harvest. We do read where it says God will send the rain, and as a result of the rain, the harvest will manifest. Well, what's the caveat? Once that harvest manifests, someone has to go out and do the harvesting. In other words, someone has to do the work. If you're signing up to say you want to be a safe haven vendor, you're really saying that you want to do the work. And so then I asked them, I say, well, do you know where that harvest is? And they'll say, well, where's the harvest? It's in that school right down the street from that ministry where you're serving. And so we have fun with that. And so we end up connecting them to the schools. And many of them, they operate Monday through Friday. And they have to have one worker for every 15 students. And the young people can come in, they get a meal. For many of them, this will be the only meal or the last meal that they will receive before they go home. They also have a safe place to go where they can do homework, where they can meet new people and have support from adults that care about them. That's what Safe Haven is all about. We are looking to get additional funding because we do know that any work that you do in ministry, you're going to create an expense, especially when you're working with young people. And so we do realize that they do need the funding so that they can do the work that they do. But those are the three initiatives that we do. We're steadily adding on. COVID-19, it just caused us to be more creative. And one of the things that we're looking to do next school year is to implement what we're calling community learning pods. And this is going to be in partnership with Google so that our young people and our parents, that they can become Google certified, where they can now get jobs in the tech industry, where they can get a job starting off at $40,000. Many of our young people will not go on to a higher education institution to get advanced technological training. And so to be able to create these learning pods is going to be groundbreaking. And we are looking to connect with the faith community to help support with these community learning pods.
Well, outstanding. I'm curious, what are some of the emerging trends that you're seeing, especially in the last year? What's happening with our students?
Well, I tell you, our young people, this generation is, I say it's a hyper intelligent generation. You all may have some young 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds in your families. They already know how to swipe on an iPad. They already know how to operate the cell phone. So we have our young people within CPS. They're very much into technology. But unfortunately, not every school is a STEM school or a STEAM school. And so what's happening is that in remote learning, COVID-19 revealed that there was this digital divide. Because even though it sounded like a grandiose idea where we would embark upon remote learning and the young people can use devices, we found out that many of them didn't have internet in the home. Many of them didn't have devices. So once you give them a device, they go home, they still can't use it because they didn't have internet access. This is a trend that is an unfortunate trend that was prevalent, not just here in Chicago, but throughout the United States and throughout the world for that matter, where remote learning, even to this day, is still a challenge. Because now, even when you give them the devices, you still have young people that are in a home where they don't have adequate adult supervision. True story, speaking with an educator, I wanted to get a handle to find out what's the trend, right? What's happening? How are young people engaging in the learning? Well, the one educator told me that while she was attempting to teach the students, there was this one student where he started out being engaged, but then eventually he began to kind of just wander off. He was drifting off. He was no longer present in that digital space. Well, come to find out, he was in a household where the guardian at the time was engaging in some narcotics, and this young person ended up getting a contact high while the guardian was in their presence. Well, because we're mandated reporters, once we learn of a situation like that, they had to call and report it. I'm sharing this story to let you all know that when we were trying to get young people back into the schools. And there was this fight between CPS and CTU. The main reason why our CEO was trying to get our young people into the schools, back into schools, is because remote learning was not working well for Black and brown students. That's it. In a nutshell, our Black and brown students were not learning. And this next upcoming school year, we're going to spend a great deal of our time working on unfinished learning. You may hear that term often in the future, but that's what we will be doing. We'll be trying to help. How do we mitigate learning loss? And so unfortunately, Reverend Smith, that is the trend right now, is that many of our young people, they are not learning. I have 2 employees on my staff who have young people who are in school, and they're struggling themselves. And they're saying that they're young people because we're meant to be social, right? As I mentioned earlier, that our God is relational, and our young people, they have to be in those settings, many of them, where they're with their peers so that they can continue to learn.
As a parent who has to often supervise, I have a son right now who's in school. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you're trying to work, and I understand the difficulty there. And one of the questions I had for you was, you know, what do you think the future is for virtual education? If we see that it's not feasible, at least for children of color, how are you developing policies and approaches for the future? Is virtual education here to stay? Are we going to look at hybrid models? And what are your thoughts about moving forward? Because it appears that the divide is not helping our children in particular.
Indeed. Well, virtual education is not going to go away. As you all see, the pandemic, even though we may take 2 steps forward, it seems like the next day we're going backwards again, even with the vaccinations. Next school year, unfortunately, it will probably look a little bit like it did this year. However, we will have had some training this year. And that's kind of what I look at this season that we're in now, is training. It has caused us to look at the investments that need to be made. So CPS is already scheduling to and prepared to invest thousands of dollars, millions of dollars into the digital learning. And this is something that it may be a hybrid next year, but we're going to see how things work once the young people are vaccinated, as well as the educators. You're also going to start to see more of, like what I mentioned earlier, the community learning pods. One of the things that we did during this pandemic is we created an RFI, which is a request for information. This was to see if people in the faith community could set up shop in their places of worship to provide an adequate space for young people to engage in remote learning. We're probably going to see more of that because if they can't go to the school, or if the parents aren't comfortable with sending them to the school, we at least want them to send them to an environment where they can get adult supervision and they can continue to learn. Next year, you're going to start to see more after school programming, where when young people get out of school, they'll have another place to go beyond safe haven. They may be able to go to a community center, the YMCA, and get more technical learning, to get more support, to get them brought back up to speed. But as it relates to the future of education and learning, the digital piece is going to be here to stay. There were some districts that already were there, right? They had already invested into these hybrid models. I have a young cousin who's in Houston, in the Houston school district, and they were already engaging in remote learning on some days. So it's something that's going to be with us for a while.
I have a ton of questions about these community learning pods. I have some ideas I want to talk with you about in terms of at least the consortium and the representatives that we have here today. That's an exciting model. And you know that we talked about that with the Black Faith Leader Collective in terms of churches offering their spaces for community support, whether it's vaccinations, but now you're saying there's a demand for spaces where you could have learning pods.
Yes.
So I want to ask this question: why is faith significant to the public education system? Why faith leaders?
Indeed. It's a wonderful question. I tell you, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked when I tell someone that I am the director of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives with Chicago Public Schools. The eyebrows get twisted. They're like, what? Office of Faith-Based? How is there an Office of Faith-Based in Chicago Public Schools? What happened to the separation of church and state? And then also get questions about, well, are you all working on bringing prayer back into the schools? And so I have to tell them, I say, well, as long as tests are being given out in the schools, you better believe those young people are still praying in the schools. So prayer has not left the building. But as it relates to the Office of Faith-Based and faith, many of our faculty members, our students, the families, they get their core values from a particular faith. And it's not always the same faith. When I came on board, we did work with a lot of churches, Protestant churches, but that was it. But when you begin to survey our schools and the student population, you'll find out that there's a great deal of those who subscribe to the Islamic faith. We have a Jewish population in our schools. So it only makes sense that we work with the faith community because perhaps many of our, and you all know this, that when people find themselves in need, sometimes before they go to the doctor, before they go see the lawyer, before they see anyone, they go to their congregation, to their places of worship, to see their pastor, to see their priest, see the imam. And so we try to connect to the faith community. One, to let the faith community know that we appreciate the values that they have. And then two, it introduces these young people to another space in their community that they may have thought was just an old building, somewhere that they just thought it was just there. It was just decoration, right? A museum. And here it is now. They see that, wow, this is a good, fun place to go, a loving place to go. And it becomes a mutual benefit, both to that faith community as well as to the schools. I also believe that it's important because when you're talking about creating sustainable communities, you can create affordable housing, and affordable housing alone will not solve the problem or the inequities that exist in our communities. You can put quality education in the communities, but a quality education alone does not solve the problem. Once that child goes to that school to get a quality education, and if they don't have affordable housing, or if their parents don't have employment, they're going to be forced to go to another community where they may be able to get a quality education, affordable housing, and maybe where they can find employment. All of these things play a role: affordable housing, adequate healthcare, quality education, employment. All of those things play a role in creating sustainable communities. And so if we don't work with the faith community, you're eliminating a critical part to that community. And if we're honest, in many of our communities here, especially here in the city of Chicago, before that school was there, before many of those houses were constructed, that faith institution was there. And so we understand that though they are pillars in the communities where we live.
So what are some of the measures that you are putting in place to do that type of outreach? What are some of the plans that you have in terms of dealing with the growing religious plurality?
Well, one of them was connecting with people like Reverend Dr. Smith, because he works at an institution that is culturally and religiously diverse. And it only makes sense to connect and partner with institutions as such. I am a product of McCormick Theological Seminary, which I chose to go there because after studying at a conservative university, I wanted to go somewhere where my ethos could be challenged. And I went to McCormick, and I was stretched, and I met some wonderful people there. And it's similar to Chicago Theological Seminary, where we appreciate other religions, other faiths, and people who don't even subscribe to faith at all. And in our city, as such as Chicago, which is a very diverse city, but it's also a city where there are so many inequities. There are so many in the injustices that exist. I think that you have to work with the faith community in order to eradicate some of those systemic evils that exist. So partnering with you, partnering with the Council of Religious Leaders, partnering with other organizations that have the same values and principles that we have. One of our core beliefs in Chicago Public Schools, that's a part of our 5-year, or a part of our CEO's 5-year vision, is that we are concerned about the whole child. We are concerned about the whole child, not just that education experience, but what about the not just the academic progress, but what about the academic experience? The academic experience will oftentimes lead to the academic progress. So if we partner, if we do things like this, me being on this Zoom call today, I tell you, you all have no idea how much this means to me, because our vision for our office was to be a genuine interfaith office, a genuine interfaith office where all faiths were represented and where we began to hear what other people see, what's happening up north in where we have a greater Islamic community. What's happening there? What are some of the disparities? What are some of the one of the things I've had the pleasure of doing as well, Reverend Smith, is working with the International Bullying Prevention Association. And I have to say this, that just looking at what's happening in Minnesota, I would have never known that back in 2018, when I spoke at a conference at the University of Minnesota on religious bullying, that we would see what's happening take place now there in Minnesota, especially in wake of George Floyd and then the recent events. I really believe it was a divine moment, because when I was in that conference dealing with the religious bullying, I couldn't help but think about my own faith and the bullying and the things that had taken place down through the years in history, where we began to criticize someone or exclude people simply because they don't believe what we believe. The same thing happens in community and in our school systems, where many of our young people are teased and bullied because people will subscribe them to a particular faith, mainly because of their ignorance and thinking that they, because of what they think their ethnic background is. Well, what I'm trying to do is educate our educators, educate our partners on religious diversity. How do we go beyond tolerating someone's faith and to go from tolerating to appreciating someone's faith? That's a true sign of maturity. That is a true sign of someone who is really concerned and really loves community. And so we have a faith leaders meeting that takes place every first and third Thursday of the month. This is something that has never taken place in Chicago Public Schools, a faith leaders meeting. And so when I brought this to my boss and to others, they're like, well, Alan, what's going to take place at this faith leaders meeting? Capacity building. We're going to create space for them to hear what's happening within CPS, but also we're going to create space so that we can hear from our faith leaders. We need to be informed of what's happening in our faith community so that we can help better serve our students, or those students from that faith community when they come to our schools. There's a calendar that I received 2 years ago from the Council of Religious Leaders that's made up of all of the faiths that's represented here in Chicago. A great educational tool. And I'm looking for more things like that that we can bring to the table to help educate our partners. Because not everyone is privy to going to an institution like Chicago Theological Seminaries. Not everyone is able to go to a McCormick Theological Seminary or Garrett. But when we create spaces like this for people to learn and for people to share, this is how we can begin to build the capacity of our leaders in our city and affect the change that we want to see happening in our city.
This is outstanding. And before I go further, I want to make sure that we make opportunities for our listeners to pose their questions as well. And so I'm going to present a question that was given by John Thomas. It said, seems that 2021 was a year of clarity and vision. One of our CTS professors described this as apocalyptic. A lifting of the veil on the realities of inequality, privilege, racism in this country. So the question to you, Reverend, is what are you seeing more clearly about the realities of public education after this year?
Yeah, so, well, after this year, as I spoke about earlier in the very beginning, about love, it is so clear to me now that when the preacher was saying that 2020 was going to be the year of clarity, I think a lot of people was looking for it. We were looking for it with our natural eye, but in most of our faiths, we realize that it has to be revealed through our spiritual lenses, not through our natural lenses. For the scripture says in the Bible that we walk by faith, not by sight. So here it is then, what we were looking to perhaps provide clarity with the natural eye, it ends up, as the professor stated, in 2021, it is now revealed, this veil has been removed. It's because clarity, I believe it comes by way of not by what we see, but by what we hear. So I began to ask myself, what am I hearing in this season? What have I heard during the COVID-19 season? Because faith comes by hearing, and what we should hear is this word from God. And I tell people that if you really want to hear what God is saying, listen to young people. What are young people saying? If you listen to them, they will tell you exactly what God is saying. Well, there's a school that I have an affinity for. It's Doolittle Elementary School. I'm sitting down with the principal at this school, who at the time, she was the 7th principal in 5 years. This school had turnover. I mean, every year they were losing another educator because no one wanted to work with these young people. It was a level 3 school, which is the lowest where you could be. Level 3 means that you need additional support. Level 1 is the highest. So the principal told me, she said, Alan, what's your vision for this school? What's your vision on connecting a faith partner with this school? And I said, well, we can do the arts. I'm thinking all of these fun, cool things we can do with the young people. And I thought I had all the answers. Well, she said, I want you to take a look at these truth is statements. And then after you finish reading, let me know what your vision is after that. So I began reading these truth is statements. The first one, and I have to tell you this is an elementary school. So the first one I read, it says, truth is, I wish my mother was in my home. The next one, the truth is, I wish we had groceries in our home. The truth is, I'm in a gang and I'm afraid for my life. Truth is, I hope I live to see 21. And on and on and on. I'm reading these truth is statements, and it's taking everything within me to not shed a tear. And so after that, she says, what is your vision? I said, Principal Jones, these young people need to know that people love them. They need to know that someone cares. And so I partnered them with a church called Progressive Baptist Church. And then also another ministry that I founded called Beyond the Brick Ministries. And we began to have these initiatives where we would bring groceries to the school, feeding over 300 families. We began to bring laptops to the school. Progressive Baptist Church, they work with another organization to bring laptops to the school and give them out to the students. And to see the smiles on their faces, to see these parents and young people overjoyed with these items that we're giving them. That let me know that though I had a plan to do these fun, grandiose initiatives, they just simply needed to know that they were loved. So that is something that is more clear to me in this season, and I hear it every day, that people just need to hear it, they need to receive it, they need to feel the love from those in the community. If we're going to be people of faith, I think that that is a message that needs to be loud and clear in the season. And unfortunately, fortunately, it's not just communicated by what we say, it's communicated by what we do.
Yes. Thank you. We're quickly running out of time. I'm going to pose this final question presented by Yasmin, and I think you begin to kind of, well, I think you summarize it, but I'm going to lift up the question anyway. Mm-hmm. He asks, how do you keep scope creep from impacting the work that is possible? Because as you've shared, you have a universe of variables and challenges that you're dealing with. So yes. How do you define your scope? And that'll be our last question for the hour.
So I define my scope as a conduit. We are a department that connects the dots. We fill in gaps. And so throughout our communities, there are so many communities who are without. We try to specifically identify those and intentionally identify those communities that are without. And we find that resource and connect those dots and make sure that we fill those gaps. Right now, by working with the faith community, you all will know that there are some communities that are heavily, graced with the Catholic faith. When you go to other communities, you're going to see a church right next door to another church, or across the street from another church. And then in other communities, you're going to see is the Islamic faith represented. What we do is once we identify those individuals, which some of you may be some of the individuals on this call that will help us fill some gaps in communities around the city, to make sure that those families do not go without. That's what we mean by going after the whole child, making sure that they get the food, the other additional resources that they need so that they can have an adequate academic experience or a quality academic experience.
Thank you, Reverend Conley. This has been very fruitful. I look forward to working with you in the future to talk about filling these gaps. And so now I will turn the conversation over to my co-host, Kim Schultz.